1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 17. I want you all to stand and go through and read it. And I'll read it out loud. You can follow along. 1 Corinthians 7, 17. It says, "But as God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. And so I ordain in all the churches. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not become circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but keeping the commandments of God is what matters. Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it, but if you can be made free, rather use it. For he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called. Now concerning virgins, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. I suppose, therefore, that this is good, because of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But even if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. But this I say, brethren, the time is short, so that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. Those who weep as though they did not weep. Those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice. Those who buy as though they did not possess. And those who use this world as not misusing it, for the form of this world is passing away. But I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. There's a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, and that you may serve the Lord without distraction. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin, if she is past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin, let them marry. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, does well. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. A wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment. And I think I also have the Spirit of God. Let's stop right there. Let's pray. And Father, again, we're just coming before you asking, Lord, that you would be the teacher here. You made a promise in your word that one of the things that we've got going is the Spirit is the one who speaks to us. The Spirit is the one who teaches us. You said that we have an anointing from the Holy One. And Lord, we just thank you that as we go through your word, that you minister through it no matter what I'm saying. You're using your word. And so, Lord, we're just going to trust you that you're going to do that again this morning, and we're looking forward to what you have to say to our hearts. Help us to be people who have open ears, who want to hear you. And we ask that you do this all in Jesus' name. Amen. You have a seat. Okay, there's some stuff in that passage, huh? Hopefully I'll be able to go through and explain some stuff to you. But basically what Paul is doing here is he's giving the same general principle that he used for marriage, especially marriage to a non-believer. He's taking that same principle and he's applying it to some other specifics in this passage right here. And basically the principle is you bloom where you're planted. And again, you have to get the picture of where these guys are coming from. They're coming from a non-Christian background, which is somewhat similar to what we've got in our culture, in the sense that a lot of people who come out of a non-Christian background have nothing to do with church at all. In fact, they're in exactly the kind of the opposite camp. Now, that's obviously not true for everybody. Some people have gone to church most of their life, and then they finally realize that they don't really know Jesus. And so they have some grounding in Scripture and stuff. But these guys are coming out of a place where there's none of it. And so they're pagans, and they've been worshiping false gods and all of that kind of stuff. And so they become Christians, and one of the questions, and this whole chapter is in answer to questions that they'd asked. So one of the questions that they had was, if I'm married to a non-believer, am I supposed to divorce the guy or divorce the lady in that instance? And then there are a number of other issues that come up and specific questions that he's going through and answering. And the general principle that he gives in all of this stuff is that you need to remain in the state that you're in when you become a believer. You don't need to make these big, huge changes in the sense of like physical issues, like your job and whether or not you're married to a person and all that kind of stuff. In moral areas, obviously. So if you're a partying, rowdy, drug-dealing, whacked-out maniac guy, there are some changes that need to be made, right? And if you're sleeping around, obviously changes need to be made. You're a believer now, and so we don't live there anymore. And those all have to do with moral issues. But the general principle is that you stay put, and it's repeated. You see it in verse 17. As God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk, and so I ordain in all the churches. You see it repeated in verse 20. Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. You see it in verse 24. Brethren, let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called. And then you see it again in verse 26. I suppose, therefore, that this is good because of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. And so that's one of those things that I've always had. Actually, I had those questions when I first became a Christian. So I'm a Christian now, so do I need to get a Christian job? Whatever that is. And I'm a Christian now, and so do I need to ditch everybody that I know and never talk to them again? And, it was that kind of thing. And basically what Paul is saying here is that salvation, although it radically alters your spiritual relationship, there is no need to alter your physical relationships except in cases of immorality. And when there's immorality involved, then obviously things have to change. You have to back off from people, and you have to change relationships and those kinds of things. One of the reasons for that is because major changes after you get saved can get way ahead of God's will. You don't know what God's doing with you. God always knew who you were, and he knew that when he called you into his kingdom that you were going to be in a certain state, and you don't know the kind of impact that you're going to have on the people that you're involved with. And so an immediate separation from all those people is going to put you in a place where actually you've got no ministry to them anymore. One of the coolest things about new believers getting saved is they have this impact on all the people who are around them. And if they're just coming straight out of the world, all the people that are around them most likely haven't heard a whole lot about Jesus, and they know nothing about the gospel, and it's all brand new to them. They're watching this radical change in this person's life that's not only going to impact that person, it's going to impact the people around them. And so one of the things that happened in my family was I got saved, and then my sisters got saved. I got saved, and then I started inviting my friends to church to hear my pastor. And, I started sharing with them, and a number of the guys that I knew ended up coming to the Lord because of what God had done in my life. And I see that happening over and over. In fact, most of the time in my ministry, actually what's usually happened, a lot of times you think of the parents, telling the kids about Jesus. In most of my ministry, it's been exactly the opposite. Kids will get saved and they go home and they start telling their parents about the Lord, and it's just like, whoa, and the parents are all like, are you into a cult? What's happening? You're changing way too much. I had one kid who came up to me when he was in my high school group, and he said, I don't know what to do with my parents. And I was like, well, what's going on? And they said, his parents were hippies at the time. This was back in the 70s. And his parents had told him, you know what? We liked you better when you were doing drugs. We don't want to hear about Jesus. And so they were like, go, we'd rather you were back out partying, doing all the stuff that you were doing before. This whole Jesus thing, it's got to stop. And he's like, what do I do? And, obviously what you do is you share with them and you love them up and, tell them what needs to be said and that kind of thing. And that guy, he was a pretty bold guy. He ended up being used by God in all kinds of really cool ways. But in most of my experience, it's the kids getting saved and leading their parents to the Lord. That's most of my experience, but that's what you see. So usually it's the kids getting saved, then it's the brothers and sisters get saved, and then they all gang up on the parents, and the parents come to the Lord. And some of that even happens like with the school. We've got the school going on, and one of the things that happens is the kids come here, and there's some Calvary kids who go to our school, and so they invite them to things like the junior high group and that kind of thing, and the kids start getting involved in the junior high group, and then the parents start seeing all these changes in their kids, and they start wondering what's going on, and then they come to the Lord and end up coming here and that kind of stuff. And so that's the way that it's supposed to be. So you don't automatically just withdraw from everything that you're doing. Now, I understand that there are times when you need to, because the Bible says don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers and that whole thing. But you can know unbelievers, and you can be kind to them, and you can love them without being like this with them all the time. And you can be an influence for Jesus with them without having them influence you. And there's kind of a balance that goes there. But Jesus came to seek and to save that which was lost. He didn't come to relegate them to damnation. He didn't come to ignore them. He didn't come to walk away from them. And so that's part of this whole thing. So you got to watch out for the major changes. One of the issues that was going on at the time is this whole circumcision thing. He says in verse 18, was anyone called while circumcised? You guys all know what that is, right? So I don't need to explain this because I'm not going to. Was anyone called while circumcised? And that means that in this culture meant that you were Jewish. Okay, and so there was a mark that was put on Jewish men, and that was circumcision. And he says, let him not become uncircumcised. I don't know how you do that, but the point is, you don't need to change all that. Okay, then he goes on and he says, was anyone called while uncircumcised? And this is really the point that he's making here. Let him not become circumcised. Because the reason that he's making that point is because this was a real issue in the first century. There were Jews who had become believers, and they were adamant on the fact that if a Gentile became a believer, he wasn't really a believer until he went through this process. And part of the process was that if you were a Gentile man, you had to get circumcised, you had to start keeping the Old Testament law, and then after that you could get saved, because that's how they did it. They grew up in Judaism, that whole thing, and they figured that you need to go through the same process that they went through. And so there was this big deal in the early church. In Acts 15:5, there's actually the whole chapter, Acts chapter 15, is about the very first church council, and it was all about whether or not Gentiles who become followers of Jesus needed to be circumcised and keep the Old Testament law. So in Acts 15:5, it says, but some of the sect of the Pharisees who believed rose up, saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. And the upshot of that whole chapter was that Peter stood up and he said, men and brethren, why are we going to put a burden on these people that we ourselves couldn't bear? And then James gets up and says that there's no reason for Gentiles to be circumcised. Salvation is by faith in Christ. And we just need to write a letter to these guys telling them to be careful about the Jews in their community. We don't want to be offending the Jews. And so basically what they told them was you need to not eat things offered to idols, and eat things that were strangled, and don't eat blood in front of Jews and that kind of stuff. Because that's what Gentiles did. They just took cups of blood and drank it. No. There's the whole kosher law thing. And so the Jews were really into that, and these guys wanted to reach the Jews. And so it was just a matter of making sure that these guys were careful about the people that they were around who needed to know about the Lord. There's another passage in Philippians chapter 3 where Paul, because what happened with that was the determination of the apostles and the church in Jerusalem. But you still had these false teachers who would go out, and then what they would do is follow along behind Paul, and Paul would come in and he would share the gospel with people. They would get saved. Never mentioned a word about circumcision. Basically, it wasn't an issue. If you have a heart that's come into a relationship with Christ, then you're saved, and there's not a bunch of stuff that you need to do as far as to your body on the outside to make you okay with God. Now, was circumcision a big deal in the Old Testament? Yes, absolutely. If you were part of the Jewish community, the entrance sign to the Jewish community was that you were circumcised. It happened when you were 8 days old. And if you came from the outside, if you were a Gentile and you were going to convert to Judaism, and it's still like this to this day, if you're a Gentile and you're going to convert to Judaism, the first thing that you had to do was go get circumcised, because it's the entrance sign into Judaism. And then they had a memorial sign, which is the Sabbath day. So there were two things that the Jews had to do. They had to be circumcised. That meant that they came into the covenant of God. And then the remembrance sign was the Sabbath. Weekly, they had to keep the Sabbath. And that's why it's all pointed at Jews. In the New Testament, the entrance sign into the Christian church is baptism. When you become a believer, one of the things that needs to happen is you need to be baptized. And the reason you need to be baptized is to let the world know that you're a believer, basically. It's not something that's needed for salvation any more than circumcision was needed for salvation in the Old Testament. But it is something that lets everybody know who you are. And it was a huge deal in the first century. You could lose your life, you could lose your property, you could lose all kinds of stuff. You were making a stand that you were a Christian when you got baptized. And then there's a remembrance sign that we keep as Christians too. You guys know what it is? It's communion, right? And so we have the same thing. It's a different covenant. So we got a new covenant with an entrance sign and a remembrance sign. In the Old Testament, they had the old covenant. They have an entrance sign and a remembrance sign. And that's how that whole thing works. And so that's what Paul is talking about here. So he would go out and preach the gospel to people. They would come into a relationship with Jesus. And then these teachers would come in after the fact and say, oh, you gave your life to the Lord? Great. And you repented? Great. But if you really want to be a believer, then you're going to have to get circumcised. And so Paul had all kinds of stuff to say about that. There's a passage in Philippians 3:1-3 that I was talking about before. He said this: "Finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. For me to write to you, the same thing to you is not tedious, but for you it's safe. Beware of dogs. Beware of evil workers. Beware of the mutilation." And in the King Jimmy, it's the concision. And what he's doing there is he's flipping this whole thing around on the Jewish false teachers. When he says beware of dogs, that's usually what they would call Gentiles. And what Paul's doing is calling them dogs. And then he said, by the way, he calls them a name. Beware of evil workers. And that's just straightforward. Then he says, beware of the concision. And the reason that King James does that is because there's this play on words in Greek. They sound similar. So circumcision, and the concision, the mutilation literally, are words that sound similar. And he says that these guys who are preaching that you need to be circumcised, they're not the circumcision, they're the mutilation, they're the concision. And so you beware of those guys. And then he goes on and says this: "For we are the circumcision, who worship God in the Spirit, rejoice in Christ Jesus, and have no confidence in the flesh." So circumcision is all about a heart that's been turned towards God, and there's this whole cutting away of the flesh type of thing. And it represents something. And when you have the reality, there's no need for the cutting away of a piece of skin. He goes on, there's another passage in Romans 2:28 where he says this: "For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men, but from God." And so that whole circumcision thing represented this whole cutting away of my old nature, cutting away the flesh, and letting everybody know that I was a new guy, basically. I was going to have a life that was given over to him. And that's what that's about. Now, with that, Paul did circumcise some guys. And so there's one guy, Timothy, that in Acts 16, 1-3, you have Timothy introduced, and I'll just read it to you. It says, "Then he came to Derbe and Lystra, and behold, a certain disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a certain Jewish woman who believed, but his father was Greek. He was well spoken of by the brethren who were at Lystra and Iconium, and Paul wanted to have him go on with him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in that region, for they all knew that his father was Greek. Okay, so what's going on there? Actually, with Timothy, he gets Timothy circumcised. Then there's another guy named Titus, got another New Testament book named after him, who the Jews wanted him to get circumcised, and Paul was like, absolutely not. It will not happen. So with Timothy, he circumcises him. With Titus, he does not. And what's the issue there? And the issue there is that Paul is going around and he is going to be ministering to the Jews. Every time that he came into a town, he first went to the Jewish synagogue and he would talk with them. Well, if they know that this guy has a Jewish mom and a Greek dad, there's this whole thing with Judaism where you get your body from your mother. And so he's Jewish in their mind. If he's following the commandments of God and that whole thing. So in their mind, he's Jewish, but if he's not circumcised, they're not going to listen to him because he's flat out disobeying this whole thing. And so it's one of those things where later on in the next couple of chapters, Paul talks about, to the Jews I became as a Jew. So if you want to minister to the Jews and you have Jewish blood going on, then it's a good idea to be circumcised so there's just not an issue. And that's what Paul was doing with Timothy. And obviously Timothy agreed. Paul wasn't coming up with a knife going, hey, come here. That wasn't happening. But on the other hand, with Titus was a Greek. And so Titus had, there was nothing Jewish going on with Titus at all. And so Titus was a convert from Gentile, from the Gentile world. And when people demanded that Titus be circumcised, Paul was like, absolutely not. He's got nothing to do with that whole thing. We're not doing that. And so you see that kind of thing going on. And that's basically, one of those, a lot of times people look at Paul and go, yeah, he's hardline and all this stuff. And Paul knew what was up. He wasn't a dummy. And so if it was an issue of principle, then he was going to stand and he would not move. If it was an issue of reaching people, then he would bend over backwards to reach people because he loved them. But again, that's one of those discernment things. So, spiritual circumcision is way more important than physical circumcision, is the point that he makes there. Then he goes on to the next situation that you had in the Roman Empire, and slavery. Most of the people who became Christians in the early centuries were slaves. And so it's not quite like the slavery that we had in the States back in the 16, 17, 1800s, that whole thing. It was a little bit more like having servants in your household in the sense of paid servants, that type of thing. But they were slaves, and a lot of times they were people who were captured in warfare, and that kind of thing. That's where they got their slaves from. And so many times, again, Christianity appealed to people who weren't at the top. And so Christianity is something that infiltrated the world basically from the bottom up, kind of like I was talking about in my family. I was the first one in my family to get saved and just went from the bottom up and started talking to the rest of my family and stuff. Well, it's the same thing as far as the classes go. So many of the people who became Christians were slaves because Jesus is the whole message of the gospel, the message of Jesus is something that's just really attractive to people who, it's just really attractive to people who obviously recognize that this life is not what it's supposed to be. And slaves would be in that kind of situation. And so in verse 21, he says, were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it, but if you can be made free, rather use it. And so it's not an absolute commandment that you stay where you're at. So if you're a slave, don't be concerned about it. But if you can be freed, then that would be a good idea. And so he's letting them know that they don't have, it's not the option or the idea that they need to stay slaves all of their lives or something. So if they can buy their freedom and that kind of thing, it would be good. Then he goes on and he says, for he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. And basically what Paul's saying is, you may be slaves in the eyes of man, but in the eyes of God, you're free. And you were freed when you became a believer. And then he goes on and he says, likewise, he was called while free as Christ's slave. So it's just kind of this situation where God takes all the class distinctions and he levels them all out. And so you may be a ditz when you become a believer and think that you have no smarts at all. But what the Bible talks about is that when you become a believer and you start doing the things that God calls you to, paying attention to his commandments, that you become wiser than all your teachers. And you may think that you've got it all together philosophically when you become a believer and that you're all squared away. But what God does with you is he basically shows you, you don't know what you're talking about. And you kind of start from square one, and there needs to be an obedience to the Lord and a following of him. Whether you know it or not, when you become a believer, you're base and you're weak, and there's problems with you. And what God does with you is he shows you that. And with the base, he exalts them, and with the prideful, he takes care of that situation. Yeah, would rather consider yourself to be base than to be prideful is the point that I'm making. The Bible says that God actively opposes the proud, so you have to watch out for that. Okay, so with the whole slavery thing, you got that. Why don't you turn over to Ephesians chapter 6 real quick. Ephesians chapter 6. We don't have slavery nowadays, at least not in the United States. Most slavery is going on in Muslim countries. And so it's kind of hard to obviously apply this to a slavery issue, but some of you go to work and feel like you're slaves, right? And so it applies to that. And if you look in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5, it says, bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart as to Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. And you masters do the same thing to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. And so basically he takes the whole employment thing, and that's what I'm going to use it for, and he again uses it as a ministry tool. So if you are employed by somebody, when you are there, what you're supposed to be doing is serving them like you would be serving Jesus. So if you're employed at a fast food restaurant and the owner says, hey, go do the dishes, you treat it like Jesus said, hey, go do the dishes. And you go over, and if Jesus asked me to do the dishes, told me to do the dishes, demanded that I do the dishes, let's use all those terms. If he did that with me, I would go do the dishes and I would do them the best that I could, right? That's what I would do. And he says here that when you're doing this, you need to be doing it with sincerity of heart as to the Lord. And so there have been times when I worked for somebody that you just could not please them. They're always picking you apart. They're always saying things about you. It's like you feel like they want to fire you any moment. And what you do, and it's hard to work for somebody like that, and what you do in a situation like that is you stop working for them and you start working for Jesus. That's how you do it. And the Bible talks about the fact that if a man's ways please the Lord, then he causes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Some of you have enemies and they're your boss. And that's the way to reach them. And again, I understand that there are going to be times when there are people who are just unreachable and they don't care and they're just after you. And sometimes they're after you because you're a Christian. And if that's the case, then you can rejoice because that's how they treated the prophets before you, Jesus said. And great is your reward in heaven. But if you're in a situation like that, if you treat your boss like he's Jesus, that is the best way to reach the man. Look at verse 6. It says, not with eye service. That's the idea of I only work hard when he's looking. And otherwise I have solitaire up on my screen, on my computer screen, or I'm playing Angry Birds on my, whatever. That's eye service. Oh, the boss is coming. They had these programs back in the 90s where you could be playing solitaire and you could hit a button, like a macro button, and a spreadsheet would come up on your screen. in case the boss was walking by behind you, just ding, and the spreadsheet comes up and it looks like you're working. And that's eye service. You're not supposed to be doing that. It goes on and says, not with eye service as men pleasers. And that's what you are when you're doing that stuff. But as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. So here's the will of God in an employment situation. You are hired to do 8 hours work for 8 hours pay. That's what you're hired for. And so you should be giving them 8 hours work, full day's work for a full day's wage, no matter what anybody else is doing if you're working at Hanford. Right? And I understand that there's those issues out there where people get all ticked off at you because you're working and they're not, and you're making them look bad. You serve the Lord Christ. And I understand all the politics involved with that, and you just got to pray through it and figure out what needs to happen there. But you serve Jesus, and so that's the way that's supposed to go. I can't stand that stuff. That makes me crazy. Then he goes on and he says, again, with goodwill, verse 7, doing service as to the Lord, not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he's a slave or free. And what he's saying there is that even if your boss doesn't recognize you, even if he doesn't compliment you or thank you, God's watching that situation. He knows who you are. He knows what's happening, and you're getting a reward in heaven. And that's just a cool thing, because that's a principle that goes throughout everything that you do as a Christian. My relationships with the people who are around me aren't just relationships with the people who are around me. Jesus takes all of those things personally. And so I have a relationship with my wife, and if I treat her in the way that Jesus calls me to treat her, God is watching that, and he's going to reward me for it, whether or not she responds, and vice versa. You got a husband, and he is not responding to all of the stuff that you're doing for him. Jesus isn't sitting there not watching that. He's not off playing video games someplace. He sees everything that's going on, and he understands what you're going through. And even if people aren't appreciative of you, Jesus is appreciative of you. And again, that's the point there. And you can use that in all kinds of different areas. Same thing with with kids, with your parents. There are going to be times when you're honoring your parents, and it's like you don't feel like it, and that kind of thing, and they don't even appreciate it. And you have to understand that a lot of times it's because they don't get it. They're not even believers. They don't know what they're doing. They're just out there running around just doing whatever. They don't know what's going on. And so Jesus is trying to reach them. And, I don't know. I think that a lot of times Christians start getting this attitude that people in the world should act like Christians. Well, the reason they're in the world is because they're not. And you have to always keep that in mind. And so there's a lot of grace that needs to be given to people. Then he goes on and he says to the masters, and you. So this is you employers that are here. You masters, do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven and there is no partiality with him. And so there's always those situations where you got a guy who will not work, and he just makes your teeth grind every time he comes in 5 minutes late and 10 minutes late and that kind of stuff. And he goes to lunch and he's going to be 15 minutes late, and he's always going to have an excuse and all that stuff, and you just want to go and lay into him. And there's ways to take care of that. One of the ways that you can take care of that is by docking wages. Came in late, I don't know, get one of those time clocks and that kind of stuff, and just have them get paid for that. And if it gets bad enough, then there are times when you need to have a talk with somebody and just let them go. And there's nothing wrong with that. But again, you treat it as a ministry. When I had guys working for me, that's what I did. I treated it as a ministry. I still do. I treated it as a ministry. And so I want to reach these guys, and I want them to know Jesus. And so, you need to be praying for Mitch. He's about to get saved. I'm just joking. It's a ministry. And so, again, you just keep that in mind. Is that clear? My bosses loved me after I got saved. All my bosses loved me. All I had to do was show up on time. This is a pretty simple thing. If you want to wipe anybody out in your company, You show up on time. You take only the breaks you're supposed to take, and you work all through the day. Do that, and you're better than anybody else in the office. Most times, that's exactly it. You're better than anybody else on the crew. That, and people look at you, and you're watching out for the boss's interests like they're your own, and that kind of thing. You do that kind of stuff, and you're gold. And they don't want to get rid of you if they're reasonable at all. And so, my life was changed as far as being an employee by those verses, taking them seriously and treating my boss like he was Jesus. It just changed everything. So again, you have to have that going on. Then back over in 1 Corinthians 7, he goes into the issues that come up after that with the whole marriage and celibacy thing. He says, now concerning virgins, and a virgin was somebody who was obviously sexually inactive and not married. Okay? So these are the unmarried. Now concerning virgins, I have no commandment from the Lord. And again, what he's saying is Jesus didn't deal with this. Yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. And so he's letting you know his apostolic opinion on this whole thing. And again, it's in the Bible, right? Verse 26, he says, I suppose, therefore, this is good because of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? That's talking about your wife has died. Do not seek a wife. But even if you do marry, you have not sinned. Well, that's good to know that I haven't sinned because I got married. I just think that's funny. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. See verse 26 where he talks about the present distress? What he's talking about is, again, it's first century stuff. You become a Christian and you're on the edge here. You become a Christian and the Romans don't like it because they're going to come into town. They're going to set up a table. They're going to set up a bust of Caesar. They're going to put a little plate in front of it, and you're supposed to come up with a pinch of incense and throw it into the coals on the plate and say, Caesar is Lord. That's what you're supposed to do. And if you don't do that, you're an insurrectionist, and the Romans can kill you. That's where they lived. And so you're a Christian, you're not going to do that. Now, in the early years, the Christians were exempt from that because the Romans considered them to be Jewish. And the Jews didn't have to do that. But as time went on, it became more and more clear that the Christians and the Jews were something that were distinct from each other, and the Christians started coming under persecution. And there's a big one coming in less than 10 years. This was written about 56 AD, and in less than 10 years, Nero is going to go crazy, and he's going to start persecuting Christians. And then it just goes downhill from that point on in the Roman Empire up until the 300s. It gets really bad. And so what Paul is saying there is that one of the reasons in his opinion that it would be good to remain unmarried is because of the danger of persecution. And the idea behind that is, okay, if I'm single and they're going to kill me for being a Christian, that's something that I can handle. I'm not saying, you know what I mean, relatively speaking. I don't want, somebody to kill me for being a Christian. But that's easier to handle than them killing my wife. That's easier for me to handle than them killing my kid for being a Christian. See what I mean? And so that's what Paul's talking about. We're in a situation where it's a little bit dangerous here. There's a present distress. And so it would be easier for you if you remained unmarried, because when the persecutions come, they are going to go after your wife. They are going to go after your children. And there are stories like that in the stories of the persecutions. There's a book called Fox's Book of Martyrs. Every Christian should read it. It's an awesome book. And actually, I don't even know if this story was in that book. But there's a story of a lady in the 2nd century who was being persecuted by the Romans, and they were going to kill her and her little boy, her little 7-8-year-old boy. And as they're torturing her boy, she says to him, you play the man because you're about to go home to be with the Lord. And they killed him. And then they killed her. And that's the kind of thing that these people went through. Can you imagine sitting there watching them torture your child, and then knowing that that he's going to die, and then that they're going to come after you? That whole thing. Coming after you is no big deal. The child thing, that's something that's hard to get past. It's hard for me even to tell the story. I got illustrations in my computer that I will not share with you, because I'll just sit up here and bawl because they're so intense, and it has to do with this kind of thing. And so what Paul is saying here is, in the situation where you're under persecution, it's easier if it's just you and not anybody else. And so that's the first point that he makes. And again, he says, verse 27, are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. Actually, see that passage? That's a good general principle just in general. One of the biggest problems I had as a new believer was the whole seeking a wife thing. I was constantly going around looking for who my wife was going to be. And it was, I was an usher, and it was down in Southern California, and I would carry the bags down the rows, and every once in a while I'd see this foxy babe, and I'd go, is she the one, Lord? I always had my radar going, woot, 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 woot. And that whole thing. And it was just like, I could just tell you story after story of, like the whole thing of having girlfriends and stuff like that. And I just wasted a lot of time, because in the end, what happened was God brought my wife to me. In the book of Genesis, it talks about Adam's in the garden. God puts him to sleep, takes out part of his side, the rib, makes a woman, and then what he does is he brings her to him. He brings her to him. And in most instances, if you'll sit there and look at how your wife came to you, you can see that that's exactly what happened. God set the whole thing up. You just happened to be in the right place with the right people and all that kind of stuff, and that's what it was with me. And so don't seek a wife. You can seek the Lord and have him seek her. Right? And I'm just telling you, that'll save you all kinds of heartache, all kinds of heartbreak, all kinds of hassle, all of that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that you don't need to have a relationship with ladies and that kind of thing. Can you tell I'm talking mostly to the guys? I'm not saying that you don't need to, that you can't do that, because the Bible doesn't teach that, but it's way more profitable just to be seeking the Lord and asking him to go before you in this whole thing and setting the thing up, than it is just to go, looking at every girl who comes in and walking over and going, I think God told me to marry you. It's like, you want to have somebody run from you? That's what you do. I've been doing single studies for a long time, and it's one of those things where over the years I've had to take guys aside and go, you know what, dude, you are never getting married. It's never going to happen, because every time a girl walks in here, all you do is walk over to her, and it's like, get. Anything that I can get off her is what I want, and then, I'm going to smother her and ask for her phone number immediately and say, let's go out on a date, baby, and all that stuff. You're a maniac. You're never getting married. It's not going to happen. You need to stop that and start seeking the Lord and start, treating people as the Lord would have you treat them. So don't do that. And I'm just, if you're built like that, nobody's talked to me about you. I haven't had emails from some of the ladies going, what's wrong with this guy? That's not what's happening. It's just, I'm letting you know there is a way to be attractive, and that is not it. Okay? So, seek the Lord. And he says, but even if you do marry, you've not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. And again, this is in answer to the questions that they had, right? And so that's what they're asking. If we get married, is it a sin? And Paul says, no, obviously not. It's not a sin. Then at verse 29, he goes on and he says, verse 28, if you marry, you've not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. But this I say, brethren, the time is short, so that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. This is his second reason for celibacy, because the time is short. Jesus is coming back. is the point that he's making there. Paul expected Jesus to come back in his lifetime. And you can see that from his writings all the way up until 2 Timothy. And it's not until 2 Timothy that Paul realizes he's about to be put to death. Before that point, he believes that Jesus is coming back in his lifetime. He's expectant of the return of the Lord. Why is he expectant of the return of the Lord? It could be because Jesus said to be. Matthew 24:42, Jesus says, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. 24:44, therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. 24:50, master of that servant will come on a day when he's not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of. Matthew 25:13, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. So there are all these passages in the Bible. There are parables that Jesus told, where he said, I'm going to go off and I'm going to come back. And when I come back, you need to be ready for me because you're not going to know when it's going to happen. And so when you're talking about the return of Jesus for believers, it's always an unexpected event. And so therefore, we need to expect him at any moment. And that's called the imminent return, the doctrine of the imminency of the return of Christ. So when he's coming for us, it's unexpected. Now, when he comes to the earth, though, when he comes to set up the kingdom, there's a series of events that takes place before Jesus comes back to the earth to set up the kingdom. And that is in the book of Revelation. It's also in Matthew chapter 24. And he just goes through a list of things that will happen before Jesus comes to the earth. Okay? And so that lets you know that the second coming, where Jesus comes to the earth, and the coming for the church are two different things. And so Paul expected Jesus to come back within his lifetime. There were no events that he thought needed to take place before Jesus came for him. And so in this instance, he says, the Lord's coming back. We got this whole persecution thing going on. That's one reason. The Lord's coming back, and I don't expect that we're going to be here very long. And so that's another reason. Now, interestingly, all the people that I've known ever since I've been a Christian do exactly the opposite with that. They expect Jesus to come back soon, and so they have the get married before the rapture rush. And so like back in the 70s, there was all this stuff going on with Israel, like it is now. But there's all this stuff going on in Israel, and there's all this stuff going on with Iran back in the late 70s and stuff. And people were like, oh man, because Iran had just switched sides. And the Bible talks about Iran being one of the nations that attacks Israel. So they'd been a U.S. ally, and all of a sudden, ding, like in days, they switched from a U.S. ally to a Soviet ally, and they switched from being somebody who tolerated Israel to being active enemies of Israel. And people were like, whoa, this is intense. It's in the Bible. And it is. It's in Ezekiel 38. And so that started happening. People were going, Jesus is coming back anytime. I need to get married. And so I knew one guy that got married specifically because he was afraid that Jesus was coming back before he got married. And so he went out and did that. And then after that, after you get married, it's have a baby before the rapture rush. You have that whole thing going on. And what Paul says here is exactly the opposite. Actually, did you know that Jesus is coming back on next Saturday? I read this in the newspaper. There's some dude going around saying that Jesus is coming back on May 21st. Guess what day Jesus is absolutely not coming back on? May 21st. You know why? Because that bozo said it. No one knows the day or the hour. And so Jesus isn't coming back May 21st. And so if you're worried about all that stuff, then don't worry about it. Okay? Because again, that's what Jesus said. So if Jesus is coming, we need to be about the master's business. In either case, we need to be doing the Lord's business, and that's the point that he's making. Lord's business is my priority. And so I need to be doing the Lord's business in my relationships. I need to be doing the Lord's business in the area of the material. You see that? Even if you do marry, you haven't sinned. If a virgin marries, she's not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. But this I say, brethren, time is short, so that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. It's the idea of my priority is the Lord's business. And there's a truth to that. If you're a Christian and you're married, there are things that Jesus wants you to do, whether you're a wife or whether you're a husband, and Jesus comes first. Now, you need to pay attention to your marriage, obviously, but a Christian marriage is not like an unbeliever's marriage. You don't get to focus completely on the marriage relationship. You don't get to focus completely on building up your little kingdom with your house and your 2 cars or 3 cars, or your garages and your shop and all of that kind of stuff. That's not where your focus is supposed to be. Your focus is supposed to be on the Lord. And so there is a difference between a non-Christian marriage and a Christian marriage. A Christian marriage is going to have Jesus throughout it. And so there's going to be ministry stuff going on that will get in the way of stuff. So that happens to me all the time. There are things that happen when I'm, home alone with my wife and my kids. And depending on what it is, it's one of those things. If I've been talking to somebody for weeks about something, or other people have been talking to them for weeks about something, and all of a sudden they have some kind of blow up because they haven't been doing the things that we've been talking to them about, and they call me at 11 o'clock at night and say, you need to come over here, I go, no, I don't. That's been coming for a long time and you should have been taking care of it. And so I don't worry about that stuff. But there are other things that happen where it's just like their lives fall apart and something awful goes on. And the Bible says that I need to be instant in season and out of season. And it's inconvenient to my family in those instances. And I need to go and talk to somebody about those things. And that's what's supposed to happen. And obviously that's not just me, that's everybody, right? You go to home fellowships, you got friends, you got acquaintances and stuff like that who need you. And again, you need to be discerning about those things. There are some things that people need to bear on their own for the next 6 hours. And then there are other things that need to be taken care of right now. And when it's that kind of situation, then you need to get up and do that, and your wife may not like it at that point. Why do you have to go? Why can't you stay? And hopefully that all gets figured out, and you understand those things about the ministry that you do outside, and vice versa. Same kind of thing. A wife's got a girlfriend who's having some real problems, and it really is an issue and does need to get taken care of. You have to be understanding about those things. And that's what he's talking about there. If you're a Christian, you are a minister, and you're going to be ministering to people. And so you have to obviously be open to that. He says, verse 30, those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice. And it's the idea of you're not all caught up in your emotions, and you're not all caught up in the circumstances of the time. There are things that need to get done no matter how you feel like, what you feel like at the moment. And that's that kind of idea. And you got to, again, put it in the context of these guys are under some real pressure here. And so there are, again, things that need to be happening. Those who buy as though they did not possess. And that's the idea of we're not all about the things that we get. It's not all about, my life does not consist in the abundance of my possessions, is what Jesus said. That's not what my life is about, because this is all going to burn. There's a passage in 1 Peter that talks about the fact that the day of the Lord's coming, in which the heavens and the earth are going to melt away. And if all this stuff is going to burn, what should our attitude be towards those things? And so your car is going to burn, your house is going to burn, everything's going to burn. All the stuff that you got, all your toys, all that stuff, you need to have a loose grip on those things, because they're not lasting. You're not going to be able to, I've never seen, I've done a lot of funerals. Nobody ever has a U-Haul attached to the hearse. You can't take it with you, is the point. It doesn't happen that way. And so you have to have a loose grip on the stuff. Otherwise, the stuff will get you. And again, that's the point there. And those, again, verse 31, who use this world is not misusing it, for the form of this world is passing away. Let's wrap this up. But I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. There's a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord. That defines virgin there, the unmarried woman. That she may be holy, both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And that's exactly the way that it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to be somebody who cares about how I please my wife. If I do not care about how I please my wife, I may not have a wife for very long. And again, that's an exhortation. You're there to minister to your wife. And so the things that please her need to be paid attention to. And if you don't do that, it's not biblical. You're supposed to be doing that. And vice versa. A wife needs to be caring about her husband. You don't live in the house by yourself. Either one of you. And so one of my focuses as a Christian husband is the fact that I'm supposed to be taking care of that ministry at home. And when I'm single, I don't have to worry about that. So again, just using the situation with being interrupted in the middle of the night. When pastors would call me when I was single, and they did, they would call me in the middle of the night saying, Steve, hey, there's a guy that needs a hospital visit. Can you go? And the answer was always, yeah. I can go out, I can go without some sleep, and I can go down there and do that. And it was no big deal. It was never a big deal. I never had to pay attention to my kids because I didn't have any. I never had to pay attention to my wife because I didn't have one. And so I was free to do all kinds of stuff, and they used me up. It was cool. I had a really good time. I would rather be married, but it was cool. And one of the things that I'm kind of sad about with my whole single experience is I wasted a whole lot of time doing the where is she thing, and I could have been doing a lot more for the Lord. Now, obviously, in any case, that's again what he's talking about, and that's the third point that he makes. You can have an unhindered service to Jesus. The unmarried can please the Lord, but the married have to please their wives or their husbands and so forth. And then he gets into this whole thing with marrying off your virgin. He says, if any man thinks he's behaving improperly toward his virgin, what's that speaking about? And there's a question as to whether or not it's talking about a guy who has a fiance. Because in Jewish culture specifically, you would do a marriage contract with somebody, and then within about a year, you were supposed to get married. And so one of the things that could come up with that is the guy realizes, hey, I'm a Christian now. Maybe God doesn't want me married, but I'm already in this contract. Should I go through with a contract? So that's one option for that passage. But most likely it's talking about a father to his daughter, because it talks about later on in verse 38, it says, so then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. And that phrasing there is a reference to a father giving his daughter. So most likely what this is talking about is dads giving their daughters away in marriage. Now back in this day, Greek and Roman dads had control over the daughter's marriage. If my daughter wanted to get married, she had to ask my permission. And the guy had to ask my permission, and there was a dowry involved and all that stuff. And I could just flat out say no, and it was a no deal thing. And so the dad is the one who gave the daughter away. So now you can imagine you got this whole cultural thing going on. The guys become Christians, and the dad's sitting there going, so should I allow my daughter to get married? Because you're talking about this whole thing with it's better if she serves the Lord. Should I just say no to the whole marriage thing? And in verse 36, what Paul says is, if you think that you're behaving improperly toward your daughter, virgin, if she's past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin, let them marry. And that's the idea of the woman's desire. Woman's coming to dad going, Dad, I'm getting old. I'm like 18. Nobody's going to want to marry me. That's how it was back then. And so they're getting past the flower of their youth, and they're like worried, and I want to get married. And Dad, what are you doing? And the dad's like, should I do this or not? What's God want me to do here? Because he did have control. And what Paul says is, if that's the case and she wants to get married, then you do that. That's not a sin. Again, let them marry. Nevertheless, verse 37, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity. See that, no necessity? That's the idea of the daughter doesn't want to get married. Okay? Having no necessity, but has power over his own will. That's the idea of there's all kinds of stuff I can get if I marry her off. And that was the case then too, because you had to pay for a daughter. And so if I'm coming up, paying for Bobby, my father-in-law could have said, hey, a little more, buddy. I want more there. And, so it's good for the household. And then he gets her out and she doesn't, she's not eating up all the food, I'm joking. Bobby doesn't. But it's, again, it's that kind of thing. Nevertheless, again, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, if he has power over his own will and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, he does well. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. And again, that's all in a situation where the daughter doesn't want to be married. There was a real pressure in the first century for women to be married. And that's really the point that he's making there. You don't need to be pressured into this whole thing. She doesn't need to be pressured into this whole thing. And so if she wants to remain unmarried, that's a good thing because of all these other things. And then he finishes it up with, a wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives. But if her husband dies, she's at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. And again, what Paul is doing is addressing issues. So if you have a situation where somebody dies in a marriage, then the person is free to remarry, and they get to remarry anybody that they want to at that point. That's the point that he makes there. And does it say after a year? Does it say after 2 years? Does it say after a minimum of 3 months? Does it say anything like that? Now, when I talk to people, and I've had friends that have been in this situation, it's a real good idea if your husband or wife dies to at least go through a year, because you have birthdays and you have anniversaries and you have Christmas and you have all that stuff that you're going to go through. And if you're remarried at that point, that can cause you some issues. But the Bible doesn't say that you have to do that. As soon as the wife or the husband dies, you are no longer married, is what that passage is talking about. The marriage bond has been broken at that point, because marriage is only until death do you part. Now, I have told my wife if she gets remarried after I die, that I'm going to petition God to send angels to kill her husband. I'm just joking. I never said that. I'm lying outright, about that whole thing. But again, it's like I understand all the emotional stuff that can be involved with that whole thing, especially when I'm looking at somebody whose wife dies and I liked her and him together, and then he comes and replaces her. That bugs me, right? And I don't have any right to be bugged about that, because he's free to remarry. And so it's none of my business. It's none of my beeswax at that point. But only in the Lord, only in the Lord. And so that's where Scripture puts that whole thing. Then he says, but she is happier if she remains as she is according to my judgment. And I think I also have the Spirit of God. And again, what he's talking about is that whole issue of you can serve the Lord better, easier, single, than you can if you're married. And he deals with that. Okay. And now I'm done, except for one more thing. The gospel is something that's all wrapped up in this marriage thing. And so you may be here this morning and you have never committed your life to Christ. You don't know if you're a Christian. And in some of the things that I've been talking about, you've been like, is that me or is that not me? Is this, and it's that kind of thing. And one of the things that's cool about the whole marriage thing that he's dealing with is the fact that marriage is something that pictures Jesus in the church. And I reference that. So in my marriage, I'm like Jesus and my wife is like the church. That's why in this passage it says if you're going to get remarried, it needs to be only in the Lord, because that marriage represents something. And so if I'm a woman and I'm getting remarried, my husband is supposed to be like Jesus in the marriage. If he's not a Christian, that can't happen. He doesn't even know Jesus. How is he going to be like him? And so you don't put yourself in that situation purposely. You don't do it purposely. Who you're supposed to be marrying is a godly man, and vice versa. My wife is supposed to be like the church. I'm supposed to be like Christ. She's supposed to be like the church. If she doesn't know Jesus, she can't do that. There's no possibility of it happening. And so a Christian marriage is supposed to be between two believers and two godly believers. And I'm saying godly on purpose because a Christian is not somebody who says that they believe in God. Satan believes in God. Okay? A Christian is not somebody who goes to church. All kinds of people go to church and they don't know the Lord yet. And so that's not what a Christian is. A Christian is somebody who's committed to Christ. And when you get married, there are these things that happen when you get married. One of the things that happens when you get married is usually the guy comes up to the girl and says, would you like to marry me? Actually, I want to marry you. Will you marry me? And then she says, yes, no, talk to me in 10 years. She gets to make the choice, right? And when she makes the choice and says yes, then there are vows that are made. You don't get married. Let me give you just an example of me and Bobby. Fall in love with Bobby. I didn't get married to her by going over to her house. Right? Let's put it the other way. Because it works, because I'm supposed to be like Jesus. So she's like somebody who's going to follow Jesus, who's going to become part of be the church and all that stuff. So I'm like Jesus. So the fact that Bobby came over to my house didn't make her married to me, did it? Okay, so you are in God's house, so to speak. The fact that you walk through the doors doesn't mean you have any kind of commitment to God at all. It just means you're here. So just being there doesn't make you part of the church, right? And say I wrote a book. So I write a book and Bobby reads the book. She reads the book, does that make her my wife? And the answer is no. That just means she read my book. Well, Jesus has a book. And the fact that you read it doesn't make you a Christian. Right? How about she talks to me? She comes up and talks to me. Well, you know what? There's a lot of women that talk to me and none of them are my wife. Right? I got women in the office all the time. I got secretaries and receptionists and all kinds of people over in the Sunday school. Ladies talk to me all the time. None of them are my wife. And so the fact that they talk to me doesn't make them my wife, does it? And it's the same thing with becoming a Christian. The fact that you know somebody doesn't make you married to them. The fact that you go to their house doesn't make you married to them. The fact that you read their book doesn't make you married to them. And the fact that you talk to them doesn't make you married to them. So what makes you married to them? And what makes you married to them is a commitment. There's a commitment where you come to them and they come to you, and the guy comes to you and says, I want you. I want you to be with me forever. I want to be married to you. Would you like to? And you say, yes. And that's how you get married. It's the same thing with being a Christian. It's exactly the same thing. You have to say yes. And if you'll say yes, then all the stuff that goes along with it is yours. And you don't have to. So if I was single and I came up to you and I said, would you marry me? You could say, no, get away from me, you freak. Right? You can do that. Or you can say, I'd rather not talk to you. And you can do that. Or you could say yes, and that's what God does with you. That's what God does with you. And so if you've never done that, if you want to come up afterwards and talk with me about that, I'd love to talk to you about it. If you came with a friend, you could talk with them about that and find out what it means to make a commitment to follow Jesus. Okay? Let's all stand. Let's pray. Father, we again just thank you for your word this morning and just praise you, Lord, for the goodness that you've brought into our lives. That commitment that we have to follow you, Lord, just changes everything. And Lord, as we've gone through and talked about some of the just practical things on what it means to be a Christian, what it means to follow you, and what's in and what's out, and what's supposed to be happening, Lord, we just pray that you would take those things and minister to our hearts and just make us more like you. And for those who are here, Lord, that don't know you yet, God, I just pray that you give them boldness and that they would start asking questions and find out about what it means to follow Jesus. We love you, Lord. Thank you for the time together. Pray that you bless these people as they go their way, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.